Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, several local governments across Kentucky support an obviously political activism cause masked as tourism as Queer Kentucky puts on a week of bourbon event. I ask, when will our Kentucky legislature finally ban the funding of political activism on the taxpayer's dime? One Kentucky House rep running for re-election has made a rookie mistake of commenting on attack ads being run against him on social media. I'll go over just why this is a really, really dumb move and just what was said. But first, I have to admit, I kicked over the hornet's nest this week when just a few days ago, I bothered to have the audacity to say that sending the Jefferson County Public Schools, JCPS, that's Louisville, HR team to Puerto Rico, that's right, in order to recruit teachers was a stupid idea. I made this cardinal sin. I didn't realize that there was so many leftists out there that would so vehemently support taxpayer-funded vacations. Apparently, there is nothing that JCPS could do wrong in this case. But let's take a look at what I said here. So anybody who listened to the show a few days ago knows that I brought this up about JCPS sending their HR team to Puerto Rico, and I posted on the Twitters, JCPS is sending their HR team to Puerto Rico, yay, to recruit teachers. I didn't actually say yay, I was ad-libbing that. But anyways, to recruit teachers. Why does the HR team need to go and a local recruiter can't be paid a commission based upon teachers hired? ? Well, then Rita from HR couldn't work on her tan beachside. That was the comment I made. Okay, so I didn't really want to start off by arguing the actual merits of recruiting teachers from Puerto Rico in the first place, even though that is something that we need to talk about, and we will, why, like that specific idea. But I wanted to ease people into just how ridiculous JCPS is at wasting taxpayer funds, because, of course, they're one of the biggest pushers of we need more money, we can't make this work, we need more money, and saying they can't make schooling work at $23,000 a student. That's what they're spending, $23,000. And so by pointing out how they waste these dollars is really important to people understanding why handing out a 10, 11% across the board raise isn't going to fix our education system, why dumping billions more in funding isn't going to solve our education system. It is a root cause, a problem being caused by the people that we have currently in charge. They're just completely incompetent. And somehow, I didn't realize there'd be so many leftists ready to go to war, to fight, to die on the hill of protecting JCPS, sending their HR team there. So, some of the comments that people made, these are people working to teach your children. JCPS HR knows what they are doing, and we trust them over a local recruiter. You have to do things the proper way, Andrew. Guess you can't understand that. That was from a Linda, I don't know who, Linda, I guess. It doesn't matter. But the claim here, so they say that JCPS HR knows what they are doing and need to be trusted over a local recruiter. That JCPS is going there with a fine-tooth comb, with a highly trained eye, seeking out exactly what they need because they're amazing at this. Now, you'd think if they were actually amazing at HR and recruiting, we wouldn't have hundreds of open teacher positions at JCPS in the first place. We wouldn't need to be flying a team to Puerto Rico to recruit if they were really, really the most competent, amazing HR people in the world. But that was a common claim. We can't hire a local recruiter. I was wrong to say that because, and I'm quoting here, JCPS has unique needs. That's what another person said. That JCPS has unique needs and we want the best candidates. Now, there is literal companies out there who are dedicated to recruiting teachers. Like, that's all they do. They recruit K through 12 educational teachers. And in this claim, JCPS has unique needs. Do they? Do they, though? Is JCPS not going to take a regular like as long as they have the right degrees that are required by Kentucky state law, the right certifications as required by Kentucky state law. They pass a background check, assuming they even run one. They pass a drug screen, which apparently JCPS doesn't even do. But assuming all those things, are you going to tell me that JCPS is going to pass up on somebody? That they have uniquely, they're going to be like, no, we can't hire you. Now, those of you who remember the actual news broadcast that I played in talking about this knows that they mentioned that their most unique grab and need was they were looking for more special education and math teachers. So I did quote tweet that comment that made part of that. They said, "This is such a bad faith question based upon no understanding. JCPS has unique needs and we want the best candidates. You complain about the quality of teachers, but then you want them to outsource the entire hiring process. Get real." And I said, I quote tweeted that commenting saying, "Nothing says the best candidates like recruiting from Puerto Rico, which has a lower graduation rate than JCPS. I'm also sure that English as a second language to the teacher will not be a barrier to kids who are already struggling to learn math and reading." Now, of course, I'm right. I'm just right that a English as a second language between a teacher when they're trying to teach, I don't know, English, for an example, how to read English, how to write, isn't really helpful. And maybe you need them for your ESL classes to help the Spanish-speaking teachers, but that wasn't the special needs that they said they needed. That wasn't what they were saying JCPS is most behind in. They were saying it was math and special education, where English as a second language is like a big problem. Maybe not as much in math, because math is kind of universal, but I could definitely see in special needs it being a big problem. And this is the whole thing. It is just about going on vacation. How do we know this? Because they're not going to Minnesota or North Dakota to recruit, where people might be attracted to more mild winters. And you say, well, that's because, North Dakota, South Dakota, they pay enough, and we don't pay enough. That's why we can't attract those people. Okay, why don't we recruit out of Mississippi then? Why aren't they taking a trip on down to Mississippi to recruit, where teachers are paid less than what they are in Kentucky? Well. You need to be recruiting these people from this other area, they say, because we need bilingual teachers. There are now approximately 50,000 Cubans in Louisville. They know they need Spanish-speaking teachers. So they claim that they're recruiting from Puerto Rico, not because it's the best place for teachers now. That's not the argument we're seeing. They're saying that they're doing it because they need teachers who can speak Spanish. Everybody speaking the same language in a country, having one language that we all speak fluently, is really, really important to unity for us coming together as a country. We know this intrinsically and actually biblically. This was spelled out for us thousands of years ago, that you need to have a national language for unity. Why? Because you have the story of the Tower of Babel, where they're building a tower to the heavens. In order to stop them from doing so, God knocks down the Tower of Babel and then casts different tongues. So people started speaking different languages, because then they wouldn't be able to communicate. And when you can't communicate, you can't cooperate and work together. So, pushing forward this idea that when people come to our country, they don't need to learn English is going, and they don't need to assimilate and learn English, is creating division with the country. That will be one of the things that tears this country apart. Because when we can't clearly communicate with one another, we can't get along. And I really shouldn't have to explain that. And that is really the big problem with going to Puerto Rico. We don't need a bunch of teachers who have English as a second language. We don't need to be recruiting from second and third world countries. We need teachers who can teach kids to read, write, and do math. And we can pay them plenty to do that if we bothered to cut all the uselessness, like sending an HR team to Puerto Rico, out of our public school systems. Well, coming up after this, Queer Kentucky's putting on a Bourbon and Belonging event week. We'll go over that and why you should care after this short break. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Queer Kentucky, so I guess an organization, is putting on a Bourbon and Belonging event. And I wanted to read to you They posted something on their website about this, and they've got their graphic out about it. And I want to go over this to you, okay? I want to read to you from their release here, their press release, so you can understand what's going on with this event. And you should care. Everybody should care. Why? Because you're paying for it. We'll get to that here at the end. But starts off, this is from Missy Spears, the executive director. Could be a guy, could be a girl, doesn't matter. It's just, they're mentally ill, most likely. Definitely. I guarantee you they have a therapist. Anyways, it says, "Dear Queer Kentucky, I'm thrilled to announce Bourbon and Belonging, Kentucky's Queer Bourbon Week. After working behind the scenes on this project since last summer, I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce Bourbon and Belonging to you. Over 5 days and across 8 cities in October, participants will partake in dozens of curated experiences across Kentucky, including rare tastings and tours, upscale dinners, pool parties, art events, drag brunches, dance parties, and experiences specifically planned for our sober community." Right, I want to pause here, okay? Because we're already not starting off strong. That clearly this has less to do with bourbon and more to do with queer. And we know that because of the list of events is exactly the kinds of things that a LGBTQ purple-haired crazy person, I think pink-haired, Missy Spears is pink-haired crazy person would want to do. Not what a bourbon enthusiast would be doing to celebrate bourbon, okay? And I guess because if you just did normal bourbon things, well, that just isn't gay enough for their taste. So, in rare tastings and tours. Okay, that's fine. That is something you do with bourbon. That's right. Upscale dinners. I've been to plenty of upscale dinners where I've had a glass of bourbon with it. They had a bourbon pairing throughout. Makes sense. Pool parties. Pool parties and bourbon. I don't think, while you can drink bourbon at pool parties, sure, I don't think we often, when we're at pool parties, think to ourselves, oh, you know what would go great with this? Bourbon. That's just not a common thing at pool parties. Art events. I guess, yeah, you could drink bourbon while you're doing that. Drag brunches. Okay. There's another one. Drag brunches. Because, of course, they got to bring drag into this, right? But it can't be just like a drag event. It's got to be a drag brunch. But, famously, brunches don't really have bourbon involved. They're like mimosas and Bloody Marys. You don't typically drink bourbon at brunches. And then dance parties. Once again, that's not super in the bourbon community. And then finally, experiences specifically planned for our sober community. Well, now you've gone way off bourbon. If you just want to have a gay week of events, have a gay week of events. But to tie bourbon into it just seems like you're reaching here. You're just trying to find another week where you can celebrate the fact that you're gay and you want everybody to pay attention to you, or you're a part of the LGBTQ mob and you want everybody to pay attention to you because a whole month isn't enough for you, and other weeks and individual remembrances. That's not enough. You need more attention. So now you want to have your own bourbon week. Returning now, though, to the article. Leading the charge on a statewide bourbon week spanning 8 markets isn't within our normal scope of work at Queer Kentucky, but at its core, Bourbon and Belonging is about including the LGBTQ community in Kentucky's largest industry. I got to pause again. All right? Because this is how you know that idiots are putting this on. I mean, like actual morons. And I don't actually expect you to know off the top of your head per se. I happen to have known off the top of my head, which is why I bothered to stop here. Bourbon is not Kentucky's largest industry. It's actually not even close. So when you look at, according to Kentucky industry trends, when you look at IBIS World, when we look at Kentucky's largest industries by revenue, we see first is health and medical insurance at $42.8 billion, automobile and light-duty motor vehicle manufacturing at $29.3, automobile wholesaling at $25.3 billion, hospitals at $20.6, gasoline and petroleum bulk stations at $16.6, chemical wholesaling at $12.6, new car dealers at $12.4, gas stations with convenience stores at $11.2, warehouse clubs and supercenters $11.1 billion, drug, cosmetic, and toiletry wholesaling $10.9 billion. That's the top 10 industries. You may say, Andrew, that may be the industries within the state, but they're talking about Kentucky's largest exports. Well, that bourbon isn't even close to our highest exports either. For example, our top export in 2021 was aerospace products and parts at $7.9 billion. After that came pharmaceuticals and medicine at $3.3 billion, motor vehicles at $2.7 billion, resin, rubber, fiber, and filament at $1.3 billion, and motor vehicle parts at $1.1 billion. So it would be more apt if you want to make sure that the LGBTQ community is included in Kentucky's biggest industries, you'd be talking about the automobile industry, not bourbon. And like I said, I know, I don't expect you to have known that bourbon is nowhere near our top industry in Kentucky. I knew because I talk about Kentucky all the time. But you also aren't writing an article and you're also not the one organizing an event surrounding the bourbon industry in Kentucky. You would think that you would care about the actual facts if you are going to organize an event around bourbon. The left has never really cared about the facts at all. If they did, they probably wouldn't be on the left. But let's go back here to the article. We are moving past bourbon's predominantly cis, male, straight, and white image to show that bourbon, as well as Kentucky, is queer inclusive and for all of us. We live in a state and a country that works hard to push our community down. This event is us pushing back hand in hand with the biggest bourbon brands in the world. The LGBTQ people apparently think that they can't find belonging in the bourbon industry, but we know that they can. And I don't think any of us actually believe that the LGBTQ are somehow put upon by the bourbon industry either. And I think we can base that upon the fact that, it took them less than a year to organize this thing. That doesn't strike me as you need to push back a whole lot. And also, generally speaking, you're not pushing back against the industry when the industry is literally sponsoring you. Do you know how protests and activism is supposed to work? You're so desperate to be victimized that even when they have institutional support and power, when you're being supported by the largest industries in the sector that you're going into saying, oh, this industry hates us. Clearly it doesn't. They're partnering with you and taking less than a year for you to put on events and sponsoring your events. Doesn't really seem like, you're really being put upon all that much. Returning to the article. It was 1 year ago that trans content creator Dylan Mulvaney posted a short TikTok promoting Bud Light and small minds around our country exploded. With the Bud Light backlash still fresh in the mind of our community, as well as the adult beverage industry, there were many discussions among our team regarding the potential impact it could have on bourbon and belonging's ability to exist. First off, that is an awfully generalist take on the Bud Light fiasco because it really didn't have anything to do with Bud Light sponsoring gay events like this or rainbow flag things, because we know Bud Light would do that. They'd sponsor gay events. They put rainbows on beer bottles. They sponsored gay pride festivals. It had to do with the lie of Dylan Mulvaney being a woman and the fact they made a can celebrating 1 year of womanhood. And it's offensive. It's offensive to women because Dylan is a parody. Dylan is exactly what a dude who would think being a woman is like. A dude who views women as delicate and overly emotional creatures that are materialistic and vapid. That's why it's so offensive. That's why Bud Light making a can for him was so offensive. Because it's offensive to women who have been women for their entire lives. For Bud Light to celebrate and buy into the lie that somehow he's been a woman now for a year, while he's actually been acting like the worst parody of womanhood ever. And it's offensive. It's offensive to anybody who at all actually cares about women. Finishing this off, though, let's face it. The LGBTQ community has had a complicated relationship with corporate... I'm sorry. This is a hilarious article to me. Okay. The LGBTQ community has had a complicated relationship with corporate America over the years. The rainbow profile pictures come down on June 3rd as quickly as they go up on June 1st. Representing their time of allyship has come to a neatly packaged end for the year. Love it or hate it, we live in a society where freedom and fairness are determined by where the money flows, and our elected officials are far more likely to back off of anti-queer legislation when AT&T or Toyota speak up instead of their actual constituents. As conflicted as I have felt at times, I have so much fear for the day they don't bother to show up at all. And with events like Bourbon and Belonging, I continue building hope for Kentucky. Kentucky is bourbon. Kentucky is beautiful. Kentucky is complicated. And Kentucky is queer. And this October, I invite all of you to celebrate this with us. Missy Spears, Executive Director. The LGBTQ mob has a complicated relationship with corporate America. And what complication is that? Your cause receives millions a year from them. They don't spend all year round constantly talking about who you go to bed with. They only have once yearly DEI trainings instead of once weekly or monthly, what you want. Is that what the complicated relationship is? What's funny is they do recognize this as being political. I'll point back to this, showing exactly how they recognize it being political, and most importantly, tell you why you should care. Why should we care beyond a passing fancy? And what should we do about it? Well, we'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, we're digging into Bourbon and Belonging, a queer Kentucky event. They're doing a week of bourbon-esque events. I mean, I don't know. They're throwing in events that have nothing to do with bourbon. It just seems like another gay pride week. But anyways, they are deciding to put on this event in order to make it clear that bourbon is not just for the cis white males, because we all assumed that, of course, bourbon was in the bourbon industry, and all the corporations, giant corporations that own bourbon companies are not, already in the pockets of the LGBTQ mob, which, of course, they are. I mean, it took them no time at all to jump on this bandwagon and sponsor this event. But what's funny is in what they said, and I want to zero in on it, they noticed the fact that love it, I'm quoting now from them, love it or hate it, we live in a society where freedom and fairness are determined by where the money flows, and our elected officials are far more likely to back off of anti-queer legislation when AT&T or Toyota speak up. That's a quote from it. So they are recognizing that what they're doing here is political. It's political activism. And at the same time, though, if you call them out on this, they'll claim that, it's totally not, this isn't political at all. It's just about dignity or LGBTQ. It's got nothing to do with politics or whatever. But you are quite clearly in that statement acknowledging that other people have viewpoints other than your own. And it's a politically based one because you're invoking the fact that you're involving politicians and politics in the process. And that's important to note because when it comes to us saying, look, you can have your viewpoint, but you don't get to spend our money on them, then you're asking us now to fund what you're doing. When you turn to the government to fund what you're doing, you are inviting in our viewpoints more than just a casual passing fancy. Well, they want to stick their fingers in their ears and go la, 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 like a 2-year-old living in a world of completely contradiction. But of course, they do live in a world where you can be completely contradictory. Of course, it can be simultaneously a political action, but yet not political at the same time in their mind, because that is the world they live in. They live in a world where you can be, quote unquote, born gay, attracted to the same gender, while at the same time be born without a gender, or say gender is on a spectrum. Like, do they realize you can't have homosexuality in a world where you think gender is a construct? But somehow that fact has never crossed their mind. But why do I care about this specific event? Why am I addressing it? They do gay events all the time. I mean, and obviously they have a right to free speech and free action. If they want to put on this event and corporations want to sponsor it, they should be free to. We do live in America. Now, I'm also free to call them out for it. And if I want to boycott a brand for not, putting forward my values, I'm allowed to do that. I'm allowed to make a public statement about it, and I should be. There's two sides, and both get to have their freedoms here. we shouldn't be calling on government to get involved and our legislators to do anything, to take action against these events until, of course, our government starts to get involved. And that's exactly what's going on here with the Bourbon and Belonging LGBTQ Week. Because, according to their sponsors and their partners, they are sponsored by the City of Louisville, the City of Lexington, the Northern Kentucky Visitor and Tourism Group, which is a conglomerate of Northern Kentucky counties and is funded through tax dollars. And it's actually run by a commission that is appointed by the judge executives from each of the member counties up there in Northern Kentucky. The City of Winchester sponsoring this, the City of Frankfort, the City of Paducah, the City of Bardstown, Bullitt County Tourism sponsoring it, and of course, the state of Kentucky is also a sponsor. In fact, on their entire sponsorship list, there's only one that is actually a private organization and not taxpayer funded. So this isn't one or two taxpayer funded entities paying for and putting on this event. It's literally several cities, counties in the state funding this event. And it's at that point that you've crossed a line. You have invited my opinion into your event, and it's not just a free speech now, because you invited me in to use the power of government to stop you, because you engaged them in to fund and put on your event in the first place. So we should be asking our elected representatives to stop these events. It's not our fault they got them involved in the first place. And truthfully, banning the funding on these types of activities, it shouldn't be hard. I mean, we can look at a bill like what we saw on DEI in public colleges and universities as a great example, where they banned teaching of quote-unquote divisive concepts in colleges and universities. And we can easily see something similar in our state government to go over and to stop the spending on these kinds of things. This is clearly activism. This is clearly a political fight they are engaging in. They admit to it in their own words about this specific event. They say they are doing this to make sure brands see how much money they give to them in hopes they will lobby on their behalf. That's what they cop to in their statement. That's what they wrote on their website. It shouldn't even be controversial here to ban this, but we're unable to stop our tax dollars from funding this. Why? Because we have a bunch of McConnellite establishment Republicans that are currently in leadership and believe that we need to be the quote-unquote adults in the room. You'll hear McConnell say this all the time. We need to be the adults in the room. And what they mean by that, and their desire to be the adults, means they don't care about what the quote-unquote children are doing on their social issues. They have more important things to do. That's their implication. That let them be little kids yelling at one another about these social issues or dealing with that. Meanwhile, we'll do the important adult stuff like, bailing out giant corporations and corporate welfare and handing out millions upon billions of taxpayer dollars to private companies. And, the list goes on and on. But they say, we'll worry about those issues, getting things done, quote unquote. Well, the children, we don't care what they're doing on their social issues. That's what they're saying. That's the implication. But that isn't actually being the adult in the room, is it? That's being a really cruddy adult and parent. I guess it is. If you call yourself the adult, you would be somebody who would be charged with child endangerment at this point. Because if you're the adult in the room and you're seeing these kids running around with a bunch of matches trying to burn the place down that you're sitting in, and you don't stop them, you don't get off your old tuchus and do something about it, well, you're engaging in endangerment, child endangerment. On top of that, you're engaging in yourself being in danger. Because you're going to end up stuck in the same room with these kids running around with matches trying to burn the place down. So instead of standing up and perhaps taking the matches away from the kids, matches, by the way, that you bought for them, and then instructing them on how to play nicely, you're sitting there and doing nothing. That's not being the adult. That's sitting idly by while the room burns. And burning it is. So what do we need in order to make a change? Well, first, we need new leadership. And we have to show there are consequences for failure. There are consequences for failing to stand up for conservative values when you call yourself a Republican in Kentucky. We have to show that there's consequences for allowing these things to continue. Literally millions of our dollars a year are being spent on political activism for the left in a state that is majority Republican, in a state that has 80% of the state legislators, in a state that has a majority of Republican local elected individuals, judge executives, county magistrates, sheriffs, the list goes on and on. By far and away, Republicans are the massive majority, but yet we see millions of dollars going to leftist causes still from the taxpayer. And for those of you who say, well, that's just Bashir, riddle me this. Most of the Northern Kentucky judge executives that are in charge of appointing people to that tourism bureau that's sponsoring this are Republican. Winchester? Clark County? What party do you think that judge executive is? That's right. This ain't just Democrats. It is Republican that is allowing this kind of leftist activism to be funded on our dime. And so we've got to show that there are consequences. Which brings us to one of these do-nothing, worthless adults in the room. We'll talk about what's going on with their campaign. They made a cardinal mistake commenting on attack ad. We'll have that after this short break. You listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back in this final segment here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And so we've gone over today how JCPS is just a tire fire. We've gone over how your tax dollars are funding massive leftist activism ploys. And we've said that, we need to take some steps here. We need to ban the funding of this. We need to call out Republicans who are allowing it to happen. We need to start to make a change. We need to start putting more money back into the taxpayers' pockets instead of it being blown on whatever crazy liberal ideas that are currently out there. And to do that, we need to make some changes. And that brings us to one of the do-nothing, worthless, quote-unquote, adults in the room. That's Killian Timoney. And oh boy, is he feeling the heat. Now, I know he comes up a little bit on the show, but there's a reason why. And it's because there's really only 4, maybe 5 really hot elections going on around the state during the primaries right now. And the implications for their outcomes is pretty big. And to understand why it's so important, you got to understand what's going on in these races. For an example, in the Killian Timoney versus Thomas Jefferson race in that primary, you have Timoney, who's easily, far and away, has the worst voting record in the legislature. If you're a conservative, you would look at his voting record and say it's awful. I mean, voting to allow males to compete in women's sports. Voting no on Senate Bill 150, which banned gender-changing surgeries on minors. So basically, the bill to stop UK, who, by the way, was doing this, from chopping the genitalia and healthy chest off minors in the name of sex change operations. Killian Timoney voted no on that. And by the way, the reason why he claims he voted no on that is because he believed it was an overreach into the parental rights. And him as a Republican, he believes in small government. And that was a big government bill. And it's hilarious to hear him suddenly think that that's an overreach into parental rights when just last year he was on video saying that once a parent sends their kid off to school, they lose a right to that kid. The most local control that you could have of a child is not the parents, but the government schools. That is what he said in a little forum conversation. And so suddenly he cares about parental rights when it comes to, sex change operations, but when it comes to education, he doesn't? That doesn't sound like a principle at all. That's just somebody who's paid to vote a certain way or has no meaningful, principle. And if you have no meaningful principle, that's fine. Just call yourself a Democrat. That's okay. If you don't have a conservative principle, that's fine. You don't have to. But you do if you want to call yourself a Republican and get my support and others. And so the net result of this is that we see a primary going on where Timoney is getting backing from things like the horse track mafias, due to, of course, he sponsored that gray machine bill in 2023. They really liked that. They didn't like those gray machines, those little casino slot machines that were in the gas stations and the bars. They didn't like that. It was taking away from their slot machines, they said. So they liked that Timoney banned that. He's getting, of course, the backing from the Louisville teachers unions because they like the fact that he voted no on school choice. They like the fact that, of course, he voted to allow the males to compete against females in women's sports. That's who's backing him. Horse track mafias, Louisville teachers unions, Chamber of Commerce. And that's it. And then you have Thomas Jefferson, and he's being backed by PACs like Commonwealth Educational Opportunities, which is a more of a pro-school choice PAC, Conservatives for the Commonwealth Action, and they're standing behind Young Americans for Liberty. They're standing behind Thomas Jefferson against Timoney, saying, look, this guy is not conservative. We need to hold him to example. Now, of course, they do have combined less money to spend than the other side, but as I have stated, it's really hard to buy a race in the House. It's hard to buy a primary. Because if your opponent has at least 30K-ish in backing at their disposal, there's just not enough voters. You have a diminishing rate of returns. And so when you only have 2,000 voters voting an election, 3,000 voters on the high side, I mean, what are you going to do? Spend $150,000? If you've got 3,000 voters showing up, that's $50 a voter to advertise to them. $50 a voter per voter to advertise to them. I mean, a mailer only costs about 75 cents a household. $50 per voter is a lot. And if you end up getting slightly more than half, you spend almost $100 a voter. It's just at a certain point, people get it. You're running. And when your challenger has enough money that everybody knows, yeah, we get it, you're running too. Well, then it becomes about message. And when you have such a bad voting record, you have a lot of problems. And so Timoney's feeling the heat here. And we know this because he made a rookie mistake. Just something you should never do if you're running for office. And he is a candidate, actually commented on one of the conservative for the Commonwealth Actions video ads about him, this one in particular.
Why is the radical Louisville Teachers Union spending tens of thousands of dollars to support Killian Timoney in the Republican primary? Because the radical left knows that Killian Timoney's vote can be bought. Jefferson County Public Schools have been the epicenter of progressive policies. Transgender coloring pages for elementary students, woke mathematics curriculum, and obscene materials in school libraries. Don't let liberals from Louisville trick you into voting for fake Republicans. On May 21st, vote against Killian Timoney in the Republican primary. Conservatives for the Commonwealth Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So what did Timoney say? So he commented on the ad saying, or because Timoney is talking about himself in the third person. He should have just said I from the beginning, but he doesn't. So it's him leaving this comment and he's talking in the third person. So, or it's because Timoney is extremely knowledgeable in education. He's been a school employee for 25 years. He's been the answer to many of the universal questions around student achievement, and he has pushed back on practices from the Kentucky Department of Education, etc., that do not yield a return. His focus on development of robust vocational system where students graduate and enter the trades, making great money. He's also worked with Rawlings and Dotson to make our homeschool families receive keys money and an opportunity to play sports for their schools. Maybe that's why they don't want to lose him. Well, that doesn't make sense at all. Why would a public schools care about homeschool families and say, you know what, we really care about homeschool families receiving keys and getting to play sports for their schools? We really care about that. So that's why we don't want to lose it. You can cut that entire part because he's simultaneously arguing that he does get the teachers' union's backings. And it's a good thing that he does. And it's because he's super smart and super great. But then at the same time, he's giving a talking point that would be a contradiction where it would be an argument as to why they don't actually like him, even though they're giving him, tens of thousands of dollars. This is such a mistake. And honestly, any candidate, anybody think about running for office, Don't ever do this. It's a mistake. Because you are not talking to dumb people. You're talking to well-versed individuals, trust me. Because, of course, the PAC responded to his comment, and that's why if I make a claim that you did X, Y, Z, and here is why, don't try to defend yourself with the same laziness and talking points that you attempt to use on your sycophants and the ignorant that you so often have the opportunity to talk to. We know too much. Just like earlier when I talked about the Senate Bill 150 and parental rights. If Timney sat there and tried to tell me that he voted against Senate Bill 150 because it was a governmental overreach and he believes in parental rights, I'd be like, you literally on video said that the public schools are the most local control over a student's life and parents don't have rights. What are you talking about? But you'd have to know that he said that. So in conclusion, politicians, don't try to argue with people who are very knowledgeable. Unless you have some really novel ideas, unless you're going to be citing bill language and citing nuance and making clarifications on Kentucky revised statutes and so on and so forth. If you're going to argue from a point saying, look, you don't quite understand that issue, let me explain to you the current laws on the books and why I voted this way, unless that's what you're saying, don't say anything. It's a mistake. Because you don't have anything novel to say. All you have is talking points. Talking points we've heard before and talking points we can argue against. And that's why it pays to be an informed person. And that's why you should listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show each and every day. Well, y'all, that's all we have for today. We'll see you back here tomorrow. I hope you have a great rest of your day.